I ended last time with Jefferson's worries about the empire of liberty, that is, the growth of territory as a metaphor for individual democratic freedoms, but such a determined resolve to expand that its practices mirrored some of the worst traits of empire, of violent colonization. So let's take a few moments and expand on that presumption, whether Jefferson's worries were correct and what was at work beneath our American concept of manifest destiny. The title of Black Hawk's Chapter 7 says just about all of it: the deluge of settler colonialism. We have three forces simultaneously at work here: a fast-growing economy in the states, coupled with cities expanding faster than their capacity, and the expanding opportunities of territory. Yes, there was money to be had, but it was not found easily in the East, as some investors made killings in trade and too many were locked out. But the West, there was promise and, despite the hardships, worthy risks for travel and settlement if it meant one's own personal stake in property ownership. And I mentioned last time how much of these supposed opportunities were beset by scams and illegal land claims, offering indigenous territory outside of treaties and without license. But we might best understand this sheer amount of migration as the deluge that Black Hawk names here. It was overwhelming in its size and spread, chaotic in its expansion of legitimate and black market trading, and managed by a haphazard collection of local power and authority with various single federal agents attempting to intervene. It felled forests, it fished out rivers, built and then abandoned homes and farms, and started hundreds of small and larger conflicts with the natives who had the promises of treaties over and over that a particular river or valley would not be crossed. Oh yes, and this is perhaps critical. It was an expansion of males and whiteness. No surprise though, right? Women were certainly not in the fore of such illegal land grabs and outright violence, and neither, of course, were black slaves. We'll see soon enough how significant that is, but this is the economic and political crusade of white men. Folks like Jedediah Smith and Andrew Jackson, Texas's Stephen Austin and John Jacob Astor, or fictional characters like Natty Bumppo, aka Leatherstocking, Bonanza's Cartwright Boys, or Laura Ingalls' Pa. And this isn't just because of the inevitable machismo which mythologizes most of these names. It's the beginnings of what we have to understand our country was then: a white, male, constitutional democracy. Now, you might remember those earlier local settlers from Pennsylvania and Georgia and New York, those local Indian-hating revolutionaries who not only spurred the American Revolution by encroaching on British territories, but demanded their own share of land before the rich speculators took it all. Why were they Indian-hating? Because it was the most politically savvy strategy to otherwise unite the diverse European backgrounds: German, Irish, Swedish, French, Scots, and the like. All white. And while we're proud to sometimes reflect upon what we will later call Jacksonian democracy, we need to recognize what is actually provided. Not some universal equality and power of the common man, which is the bumper sticker version of it, but a system that offered voting rights and property ownership exclusively to white men. Certainly, women and peoples of color have fought uphill battles from this ever since. But here, as realized in the settler expansion into the West, this exclusive democracy of empire building was directly built, subsidized, paid for by the theft of Indian land. It could not have survived so powerfully otherwise. And let's make clear, too, that this is a constitutional issue. Article 1 of the Constitution makes clear that as a matter of law, Indians are not taxed. Understood legally, what this creates is a system where indigenous nations are also denied representation and civil rights. Now, if treaties are violated, they have no recourse through appeals or courts. So on the one hand, while tribes were recognized as independent sovereign entities and were fighting diplomatically and collectively to have their treaties respected in this way, they therefore had no other rights in the government. The Constitution's language literally keeps them apart even while the treaties are broken as American purchases and otherwise absorbs more land. And this is what I mean by the colonizing violent behavior or empire, which Jefferson lamented. Whatever offense is committed could be defended by, so what are you going to do about it? Quite the morality for a nation building and nation defining. So this settler colonialism created three distinct race-based effects. It was a government-supported removal of native populations. It was the expansion of the white male constitutional democracy. And as we will see, it was the expansion of African American slavery. Now, once established, this unifying of otherwise diverse European immigrant populations, there grew, alongside European thinkers too, a new consciousness of whiteness. In other words, for the first time in a significant way, Scots were Scots, but they were also white. Huguenots were French Protestants, but they were also white. Hollanders were white, Finns were white, and it was whiteness, not Scotness, Welshness, or Germanic or Scandinavian blood, which justified their Western expansion. In other words, it wasn't merely a skin complexion that was how whiteness was considered, but it was becoming, in America, a specific and solidifying political identity. What we're seeing then is something that I want us to understand as an era of removal, a decades-long overwhelming movement of immigration beyond the Western treaty borders of a country still working to define itself, one of motivated violence against indigenous peoples. What we said of ourselves and did in this era became foundational mythology for American identity, so rooted that challenging it 200 years later is still often explosive in consequence. But what this time of expansion, this removal of sovereign tribal nations isn't? It isn't accidental. It isn't a byproduct or a side effect. And it isn't some one-time tragic and lamentable event like the Trail of Tears, which is often the best our school systems can muster to talk about. The removal era of American history is a generational, systematic, and even calculated federal project.